we talk to prosecutors and they say that they follow the evidence. As reporters, we follow the facts.
This is Unknown to Known, an on-camera ready presentation. I'm Jamie Maglietta. I created this show to talk to people who are already known and those who are on the journey to get there. Today's guest is someone who has been a longtime favorite of mine on television. Her name's Laura Ingle. I met her at Fox News Channel, and I am so glad she could join us today. She started her career in Sacramento radio, covered the Scott Peterson and the Michael Jackson trials at KFI in Los Angeles, which we'll talk about, before joining Fox News Channel in 2005. She started off there as a contributor before becoming a reporter, and she spent nearly 20 years as senior correspondent covering some of the most high-profile breaking news and true crime cases in the country. In June of 2023, right around the time when I made my own career changes, Laura moved from Fox News Channel to NewsNation. She landed a NewsNation senior correspondent role, and it turned into a weekend anchor slot. She covers so many hours of programming over the weekend, and I can relate, having produced multiple hours for Fox and Friends as well as for CNN on Saturdays and Sundays. It's a grueling time slot, but she does it so well. And if you haven't checked her out on NewsNation, I highly recommend it. What you're seeing right now is one of her exclusive reports. She's been an investigative journalist for much of her career, if not the entire career. And she shares that moment where her career started in this conversation, which can be very inspiring for you, especially if you're a creator trying to figure out how to get started, how to get noticed. She has great tips. We recently reconnected to talk about YouTube. Surprisingly, a YouTube video I did on Rotten Mango showed up in her scroll on YouTube. And she was like, wait, what's Jamie up to? So we reconnected, we talked, and we've been helping one another in the YouTube space. So I wanted to make sure I drew some attention to her YouTube. Right now, she's doing really great with these wonderful reports. I'll click through a few of them during the conversation. Her YouTube channel, Crime Files with Laura Ingle, is where she tells stories on her own terms. She goes out on the weekends and on her days off with her husband, which she shares and talks about, to capture these stories for you, bringing her years of journalism to everything that she shares on her YouTube account. It's definitely worth checking out if you're into true crime. All these stories essentially write themselves. Laura is not just a creator on YouTube and an anchor on NewsNation. She's also an award-winning journalist. And she has an incredible podcast series, Long Island Serial Killer. It's worth checking out too. There's so much I could say about Laura. And the reason I wanted her on this show today is because she started, like many of you are trying to start right now, as a contributor, as a guest on TV shows, podcasts, looking for more, looking for answers. But at the time, she actually wasn't seeking opportunity. She was a beat radio reporter behind the scenes, digging into newspapers, and she was spotted. And it made me think about the creators that are finally gaining attention by legitimate news anchors and television shows for their investigative work. I recently was listening to one of Megyn Kelly's shows, and she was talking about how these independent investigators that are really creators online were getting to the facts a lot faster than the police in a couple cases. Ashley Banfield, who's another crime communicator on YouTube, Ashley Banfield, another channel to check out, did the same thing, giving credit to these independent journalists. And so Laura's story made me think about all the individuals who could be watching this YouTube channel or listening to this podcast, hoping for some inspiration or tips on how to become more known. And hard work is really one of the things that will help you become seen. Same with strategy. So if you're liking where this conversation is going, continue for my interview with Laura Ingle. And if you want more tips, check out my series, Think Like a Producer. I give media training advice for guests and hosts. On my YouTube channel, I also break down technical tutorials, how to conduct virtual interviews using Riverside, shooting with your cell phone versus an Osmo Pocket 3 or a Insta360. I'm trying to help you leverage your skills online by navigating new media with the support I didn't have and wish I did. All right, that's it for now. Let's get to our conversation with Laura Ingle. And Laura Ingle joins us now. Hey, Laura.
Hey, good to see you. I'm so glad to be on your show.
I'm really glad to see you. We've been talking for a while, but we haven't been able to make our schedules work. So I'm really glad we could have you join us
Yeah.
today. And I would love to start with the beginning of your career because you have some fascinating starter stories that
Yeah.
might be inspiring to those listening. You were in Sacramento before you went to Fox News and before News Nation. So if you could take us back to the beginning, those early struggles and how you wound up where you are now. And I know there's a lot to get to, so we can pause as you go and expand on some of the points you make.
Right. Well, I started off in the broadcast industry working in rock radio. I was a rock DJ, but that didn't come easy because I started off answering phones as a telemarketer at the station in Sacramento, KRXQ 93 Rock. And all I really wanted to do was to be in the building with my radio heroes that I listened to. And back then, AOR radio, it still is today, album oriented rock was, your Aerosmith, your AC/DC, your Metallica. That's, the mainstays. This was the big radio station in town. And I had worked for Tower Records and for Bill Graham Presents for a concert promoter. I even sold guitar strings and picks at a music store. And I was really that was what I wanted to do. And I got myself in the door, literally just interning, answering phones for telemarketing in the back. And then one day I was there late, and one of the production managers, Charlie Thomas, needed a voice for a Super Shops commercial, a tire commercial. And I read a tag, and the general manager said, "Who is that? Is that somebody that works for us?" And one thing led to another. I was reading public service announcements. Then one day, one of the DJs broke their leg and they needed somebody to come in and do the job overnight, which I did. And I had no experience, but I learned like trial by fire. And so one thing led to another there at 93 Rock, and I ended up being the night DJ Monday through Friday, 7 to midnight. Huge opportunity because that's when the rock stars came through Sacramento when they were going to be doing a show. They would come by our radio station. So I did get to end up interviewing the likes of Aerosmith and Brian May of Queen and Motley Crue. It was crazy. I couldn't believe the path that led me on. But then, as happens in radio and in our business, we had a new program director. They cleaned house. I was out and said, I really want to do news. I really was interested in that, and ended up going to a radio station that my grandmother had listened to. She had this transistor radio that was really big, and it sat on top of her washer and dryer in her kitchen. She always had it tuned to KFBK. And I fell in love with KFBK because of the way they presented news. They weren't talking down to me, they were speaking to me. And I really liked that. But of course, just walking into a newsroom saying, "Hey, I'd like to do this now," did not come easy. And again, I had to start at the very beginning and answering phones, taking out the trash, which was really a humble lesson learned. And
I wanna
began,
weigh in on that
yeah,
because that's how I think a lot of our careers started.
yeah,
That those humble beginnings, and I think what a lot of listeners don't realize is, where you are now, you're at News Nation, you're on camera, it wasn't always that glamorous.
yeah,
And a lot of people see that as I want that. I want my own YouTube channel. I wanna be the face of my own brand, but they don't realize how much work has literally gone into
yeah,
building out your brand.
right. Yeah, it does, and you really do have to take a step back, and it's hard. It's a lot of this is not easy, and like to your point, not glamorous. The long hours. I went unpaid for years, saying that I would do it for free, and then they forgot to come back and pay me. In the instance of 93 Rock, and then I really had to start off. I had to go back to being a board operator in radio, which eventually led me to. I'll fast forward to where I got to KFBK. Um, I was working in the newsroom, answering phones, really wanting to absorb. I went to college. I went to a junior college to learn how to work in broadcasting, and I was interning at KFBK. And as I was going to school and listening to what was happening in the classroom, and then at night I'd go over to the news station, and I thought, they're not. This isn't what's happening. What they're teaching in the classroom isn't what's happening in the newsroom. And I decided to actually cut that cord and just go full-time intern at the radio station. And my cousin is a cattle rancher, just to put that on the side. My cousin is a cattle rancher in my family. And one day, 1997, the levees in Sacramento broke and our entire city was flooding. And so all of our star reporters were heading out to, the American Red Cross and to emergency services. And then this one story developed where the livestock in town was the water was rising and they couldn't get the cattle and the horses out. And it was a
Mm.
huge problem. And my news director, I remember I was literally the last person in the newsroom because everyone had been dispatched. And he said, I don't know what to do. And I raised my hand. I said, I know what to do. I know exactly who to call. And I called my uncle and I drove out to Elk Grove, which is an outskirt of Sacramento, got on a tractor with a flip phone. And that was literally how my news career began, was in a
Mm.
sea of distressed cattle, which was Nat sound instantly. I didn't even need to record it.
Mhm.
I was out in the middle of a muddy field talking to these ranchers who were trying to get their livestock out of harm's way and came back to the newsroom covered in mud, exhausted and soaking wet. And my news director looked at me and said, well, now you're a reporter. And that's how.
That's fascinating. I have a very similar beginning. I actually started at a I was at a radio station too. It was a music station. And I'll remember like Willie Nelson came in and he was like one of the, guests that we had perform at the radio station, and interacting with him, I really felt like he gave me that authority to to speak up and to share my voice, because he was one of those people that unexpectedly was like, "Tell me what you think. How did I do?" And I'm like an intern, like, "I don't know. I'm a little kid." But he gave he kind of helped me become more confident in my voice. And then I went to NECN, which was a local station. I was a field
Mhm.
producer for a reporter there, and I remember just covering so much, like he was a business reporter, so much in long, long days, and they all said to me, "Okay, well, you've earned your stripes, essentially, like, you can do this."
Yep.
So, how did it feel in that moment when you come back? I mean, I'm sure it felt amazing, but did you feel like you found your purpose covered in mud, knowing what you knew from for that story?
I did. I felt like, it's like a gear. I shifted into a gear and it felt like, okay, this is right. This is what I want to do because I want to tell stories. I want to go out there and talk to people.
Mhm.
And my argument to the news director at the time when we were going back and forth of if I was ready, if this was something that I could do, he said, you don't have the experience. And I said, but I was a rock DJ before, and I was doing my shows backstage at Cal Expo, and I was backstage talking, interviewing music artists, talking about what was going on with the night or whatever was happening. And I did remote locations for throughout my rock radio career. And I said, it's kind of the same thing, isn't it? Now, granted, a lot of people go to college and do different things and
Mhm.
go down that path. But he said, it is. And he basically gave me my first shot. And we went on from there. And I got stories that I didn't love. Uh, Going around town doing some stories I didn't want to do, but you have to do those things. And then eventually, of all things, I ended up reporting on the Sacramento Kings, our basketball team, when we had Kings fever. One thing led to another. I ended up at the NBA Japan games in Tokyo by myself with a tape deck and a handful of yen that promised me that everybody spoke English. They don't. And I had some really keen opportunities along the way, and then there came a time when they were going to do a new morning show, and I thought for sure I was going to get the job. I had been working so hard. I was considered one of, I became somebody that was in the top tier of reporting, and I thought for sure I got the gig. I said this is going to be great. I'm going to be on the morning show, and they gave it to somebody else. And it was that moment that I made the tape and I started sending out my work, and I went to KFI. KFI heard my tape, which is this huge radio station in Los Angeles. KFI AM 640, a 50,000-watt station that is just a monster. And they heard my tape and they hired me. And I ended up getting down to LA and becoming a radio reporter there.
And, as you're listening, everyone that's at home, tuning in either from YouTube or your podcasting platform of choice, what you're hearing is this again. It started from a hustle. It started from working passionately toward her mission. And if you're someone listening and you're trying to build out your brand on YouTube or with your own podcast, commitment is big here. As you hear Laura, like she's committed to telling stories. And in order to do that, you really need to think like a producer and act like a journalist if you want to be as effective as possible and also avoid spreading dis and misinformation. We'll
Mhm.
make sure that we give some tips during this conversation, but I want to keep focused on Laura's journey because within that, I know you're going to really start becoming so inspired that you're going to want to start your own channel after this. So, after that, you wound up at Fox News and you were at Fox News Channel a very long time because that's where we crossed paths. How did
Yes.
that come about?
So I go down to Los Angeles. I'm working at KFI and doing, city hall stories, crime stories, and then started doing trial coverage. And it's really started out at the David Westerfield trial in San Diego before Scott Peterson and before Michael Jackson, which were my two really big stories that I did for KFI, where I became more of a on-air presence for Fox is David Westerfield. This really, really sad story down in San Diego of a man accused of killing his neighbor, Danielle Van Dam. And I was down at the courthouse in San Diego and broadcasting, and I had been going into the courtroom, taking notes, talking about what was happening on the radio. I mean, multiple times an hour, long form with the talk show hosts. And one day I heard somebody knock on my window of the car I was in broadcasting. So I've got headphones on, I've got newspapers. It's hot as heck down in San Diego. And I had newspapers, blocking the sun rolled up in my window. And I've got tape decks on my lap and a notepad over my steering wheel. And I'm broadcasting and I'm talking about the case at hand. And I get a knock on the window. And they said, "We've been looking for you. We can hear you. We've been listening to you driving from LA to San Diego, the producers." And they said, "We want you to come on one of our shows to talk about being in the courtroom and what you've observed because we've been listening to you and we'd like you to share that perspective." I had never done television before. Never ever. Never even thought of it. And I said, "Well, okay, when and what do we do?" And they said, "Well, we're going to have you on a show with Shepard Smith. You can call him Shep. And we're going to put something in your ear called an IFB." And I'm like, "Okay, okay."
Wow,
And
Laura.
I mean, when you're a radio reporter, you're in a ponytail, you're wearing chapstick. I mean, I was like, okay. And thankfully, I was surrounded by some really great people because if anybody out there has ever covered a trial or has ever watched a trial from TV, you see that this, community builds. The media circus begins. So everybody kind of knows each other and helps each other out. And one of the satellite truck operators looked at me and he's like, "You're going to need to go get a blazer. You're going to need some makeup. Here's what you do." So I ran across the street. I bought a blazer at Ann Taylor and I was so, I got myself together, got all fixed up, went over, did a live shot. I was a guest. Shepard was great. The team was great. And I was so relieved when it was over. I was like, "Whew, I did, check, did that,
Did it.
did it." And then they said, "Same time tomorrow." And I said, "Oh, no, no. I only have the one blazer. So I don't know how this is going to work." But one thing led to another, and I became a more frequent guest on Fox for that. Then fast forward to the next big trial, which was Scott Peterson. Same thing happened. I was in a car, I was broadcasting, and it was Greta Van Susteren who was walking through the parking lot, and I had the side of a van door open. And same thing, headphones on, newspapers everywhere, notepads, uh, all of my tape decks. And she walked by, and I remember she was standing there watching me. And once I got done, she said, "What are you doing?" And I said, I'm broadcasting for Los Angeles radio." And this was in Modesto, California, where Scott Peterson had been
Mhm.
brought to arraignment. And she said, "I'd like to have you on my show." So I started doing guest appearances for her, and I became a panelist, and one thing led to another, and I became a contributor there at the Scott Peterson arraignment. And I was in, we had a deal with KFI. They agreed that because every time I was on Fox, they would say KFI's Laura Ingle, which was then promotion for them. So it worked
Mhm.
for everybody
Mhm.
until it didn't, because then I became such a frequent contributor. Fast forward to the next trial, Michael Jackson. I actually got hired out of the Michael Jackson trial. Same thing. I was doing a ton of reports for both, for KFI, running through the parking lot from one location to another, from my little radio room at a coffee shop, running across the parking lot, jumping on TV with Trace Gallagher and Shepard
Oh,
and
how funny.
Geraldo and everybody, and then running back. I was running back and forth. People used to laugh at me because they would just watch me go back and forth all day long, in addition to going into the courtroom and following the case. So I
Mhm.
could talk about what Michael Jackson did or said, or, how late he was that day.
And you bring up such a great point that's relatable to where we are now. So many influencers that are covering trials are now getting recognized in the sense of they may not have that background of journalism, or some of them do, and they're going independent and they're covering trials and they're covering cases. And now they're getting that attention by
Mhm.
larger YouTube names. We'll call them TV personalities that now have
Right.
YouTube channels, and
Yeah.
are giving them that legitimizer that really helps essentially lift them up as you're more than. You're not just someone covering a trial for your audience, you're now covering it for the
Mhm.
national audience because you're the one really doing the legwork. Just like
Mhm.
Greta noticed with you, just like Shep's team noticed with you. You're doing it for radio and they're saying, you need a bigger platform. You need to be with us. And
Yeah.
that's essentially what I feel like we're seeing a little bit more of, just the platforms are different.
Right. Absolutely. And we saw that during Diddy's trial. I was
Yeah.
down there covering Sean Combs, and I mean, talk about a circus. We had all of, we've got the
Mhm.
row of media, legitimate media, with our press passes that are issued by the mayor's office here in New York. And our satellite trucks are kind of a thing of the past because we all have live views now. But
Yeah.
that row of reporters, and then you've got all of these YouTubers going around that have, in many cases, much bigger audiences than some, right? I
Mhm.
mean, some of them are really, really big. Rotten Mango, for instance, is
Yeah.
absolutely huge. So we had those people, and then you're searching out, and you've got to be careful. I mean, listen, we do go through a vetting process. I came up through the ranks by earning those stripes through those hard
Mhm.
stories told through radio and television, and learning from the best, and shooting straight down the middle, which has always been my lane. That's me. I'm right down the middle. I give both sides. There's no other way to do it. I don't see how you can even do it uh, without going straight down the middle. Um, and not doing, I'm not opinionated. I tell
Mhm.
people the facts. I can talk about other people's opinions and what they say, but I'm not going to be the one doing it. But then you get into where we are now with Nancy Guthrie and with Diddy, and you know, you've got to be careful about, in terms of taking some of those people and putting them on your broadcast channel,
Mhm.
because you don't know what you're going to get some of the time.
And this also brings up the point, the White House, they invited podcasters, YouTubers, influencers that are independent journalists into
Mhm.
the press briefing room. So you
Right.
are seeing an opportunity here for more people like our listeners to essentially start legitimizing themselves and becoming heard within this media space. I feel like
Right.
we're seeing a huge shift in how media is both prepared and consumed. And it's quite fascinating. But individuals like yourself who are shooting down the middle are always looking for the facts and it can create a telling story, like a strong story, are always going to lead. But that makes you an influencer essentially to those who want to also have a voice online in their own spaces. So, guys, if you're listening and you haven't already, go check out Laura Ingle's YouTube. We'll definitely make sure we talk about that. Before I do, I did want to bring up, you were at Fox News for 20 years with your contributorship
Mhm.
and then as a reporter, and you covered such incredible stories, and you were always someone who is very like fact focused.
Mhm.
How do you stay so strong behind that in an opinionated space? Like, what is it?
Yeah, I think you just follow the facts. Just like I was, we talk to prosecutors and they say that they
Mhm.
follow the evidence. As reporters, we follow the facts. So if I'm doing a story, I'm going to be talking to a PIO, a public information officer, or a police information officer, uh, depending on what story I'm covering. Or if I'm going to be talking about an agency, I'm going to be calling them and reaching out to them. And if I don't hear from them, you'll hear me say, "We've reached out for comment, haven't heard back." I will always make that effort to tell both sides of the stories, all sides of the stories, because I don't know, I don't see any other way to do it, because leaning on opinion when you're in that space of being a reporter, I don't know, it can dilute your
Mm,
message and your
it
craft.
can. And
Mhm.
as a producer, I've always been the individual who challenges all sides. If
Mhm.
someone comes to the table and it sounds like a very democratic view to a story, I'm like, well, what is the Republican view saying?
Right.
Or countering that and always asking, what are the facts? And it is important to keep that concept, that mindset in mind when you are producing content for your own platforms now, social media, because you never know if your opinion is what's going to make you essentially the voice within your industry.
Right.
If you are too opinionated, you can alienate people. So you want to make sure that when you get opinionated, if you're choosing to be, you're doing it strategically. So why don't we give people some tips on how to think like journalists, how to think like producers when they are crafting their stories, their shows? And then I also want to talk about your YouTube channel and News Nation. But what
Mhm.
are a few tips that you would give people outside of the who, what, when, where, and why and how?
If you talk to one side, you gotta talk to the other. And
Mhm,
if if you can't, sometimes what I'll do, if we talk to one side, let's call it a Republican, and we
mhm,
can't get a Democrat to get on the phone with us in that moment, I will go to their website. I will go to their social. I will find out what their last tweet was. And we can offer up, the latest tweet from that person, just so at least it's balanced. So at least we know what the other side, if I can't get them directly, I'll try and get whatever their latest perspective is on the issue, because that's really important. And that goes for, and I cover a lot of crime, which we'll talk about, but talking about from a prosecutor's point of view, we
mhm,
talk about, I just interviewed a prosecutor. Make sure that you talk to the defense attorney. What does the defense attorney have to say? Just always make sure that you cover all your bases. And if you're tired, if it feels hard, just keep going. Make the
mhm.
call, send the email. You have to try.
You know, it's such a good point to get all sides, even if you aren't creating content that is coming from a news story, even a trend. If you're talking about a trend, you may want to get different viewpoints around
Right.
that trend to
Mhm.
help you broaden out your show, to help broaden out your message.
Mhm.
You don't want to be thinking about always delivering your point of view and only delivering your interviewees, like the person you're interviewing's point of view.
Mhm.
If you want to have a real complex conversation, weave in some facts, stats, or other points of view. That'll really help you guys too. That's my one tip.
Yeah, and to your point, and that's an excellent
Mhm.
point, to layer the information,
Yeah.
right? To layer it like this, like, because if you're just one dimensional, that
Mhm.
that isn't so interesting. But once you start layering a graphic with facts, a chart, a poll,
Mhm.
what people say, this person said that, and then you've got this more robust product that you're putting out. Your more robust look at the story or the topic at hand, for sure.
And that's also what you do as a host and an anchor at News Nation. You have robust conversations. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that move from Fox to News Nation Anchor Desk? How's that been?
It's been phenomenal. I mean, I am so lucky to be with such an amazing group of people. I'm not just saying that. News Nation welcomed me after I left Fox, and I was on the air pretty quickly after leaving Fox. I left Fox in June of 2023, June 1st, and I was here uh, on the air by September. And that's pretty rare, I would say, in what's
Yes.
happening in the business right now. And in between, I lost my mother suddenly, so I really I feel like I went off a cliff and got run over by a Mack truck. So, trying to get back up on my feet was not easy, but I knew that I still wanted to do this. I knew that this was something I wanted to do, and I got into some conversations with people that run NewsNation, and we decided to give it a try. And we did a freelance gig, and the freelance gig was supposed to be 3 months. And I think we were a month in, and they said, "All right, it's like dating.
It
You
really
want to
is.
talk, you want to talk serious?" So I was lucky enough to be brought on as a full time staff member, and NewsNation's great because we're part of Nexstar. So we have this huge affiliation throughout the country. So if I do something on NewsNation, it can then go out to our affiliate program, ACT, that puts us in every market in the country. So I always tell people that are trying to understand how the affiliates work, or even here on NewsNation, you're like a menu item. Like, this is my story today. And then every show looks at the menu of stories and reporters, and okay, I want this in the A block, I want that in the B block. And they pick and choose and they plug us in, and there you have a show.
Mhm.
So I've been really fortunate to tell incredible stories here at NewsNation. Right now, I'm currently in the middle of the Long Island serial killer story, which I had done a documentary for on Fox and a podcast, and have worked very tirelessly on this story. And we're coming to a conclusion of sorts with the sentencing of Rex Heuermann, which we think that there could be more cases connected to him. We'll get to that, but I've told that story. I've been on ride-alongs. One of my favorite stories that I've done here. I love highlighting law enforcement. So I do, crime and courts. And I went on a harrowing ride-along with the U.S. Marshals, just because it was so, racing through the streets and tracking down the bad guys and jumping out of cars and watching what our U.S. Marshals do, our men and women who go out and keep our streets safe. A really incredible opportunity to go behind the badge with them, and a lot of court coverage, a lot of cold cases. And I even got to go cover the Indy 500 this year. So I was at the Indy 500 interviewing, you know, incredible race car drivers, and Artemis 2 astronaut, and being on the track. And I ended up jumping the wall. I was in the pit area when the winner came through, when Felix came through, and I jumped the wall and got carried up with his group and ended up filming him all the way to the fence. It was really incredible. So I've been really lucky.
It has been fun to watch all you've been doing on Instagram and seeing your journey. I was also shocked. I remember reaching out because it was like you were on Fox and then you were on News Nation. I'm like, "Laura, what a great opportunity." Like
Yeah.
to take on that anchor desk. It's a big achievement. And for
Thank
those
you.
that don't really know much about News Nation, Nation is deliberately essentially reaching out to those who feel alienated by partisan cable news. So a
Mhm.
lot of what News Nation covers is down the line fact-based news, and you seem very nicely positioned for
Mhm.
that network.
Yes.
From what I see, like its competition really isn't Fox and CNN or MS Now, but really it's competing for trust. It's
Mhm.
competing for those that are listening's belief in them, and they want to tap into that frustration and gain their trust. And what I
Mhm.
also love is when you're saying about News Nation and it's going out to the local news still remains the most trusted news source in America. People
Mhm.
still turn to local news and who's in their town before they go to national. We had someone on recently who was sharing about how she appeared on a local news station to talk about her book, and she gained more Instagram followers from that than any national
Great.
news appearance because it does essentially you're tapping into an audience that's already very trusting of who that anchor brings on. And
Mhm.
so, what are your thoughts like on just how media has evolved lately and the expansion of media offerings? Because right now, MS Now, Fox, CNN, we have News Nation, and as much as locals dying, there's still a desire for it.
Absolutely. And I think it's an incredible opportunity, but everybody's got to be nimble. We all have to be flexible. And that's hard because change is hard. Change was really hard for me in 2023.
Mhm.
But you've got to embrace it and do the best that you can. And if something may not be what you thought it was going to be, maybe give it a try and see where it leads you, because it could lead you. I mean, for me, it led me, I was hired as a reporter, and then soon after became an anchor, weekend anchor, and I anchor the longest show here for 4 hours on Saturdays from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. And then on Sunday I do a split. 9 a.m. to 10, 12 to 1. Never thought, when I first came here, I wasn't sure if that was ever going to happen, but here I am. So I think that embracing, the ever changing landscape that we're in. I mean, I don't know about you guys. Every time I open up my phone, I see that there's been layoffs. I see that some
Mhm.
newsrooms had a bloodbath. So,
Yeah.
turning to YouTube is a real thing, and I've done it. And I think, a lot of my former colleagues and current colleagues do the same. It gives us another outlet, another place to stretch our wings and flex that muscle.
Mhm.
And I think it's important to do it on all levels. And any chance I get to be on the radio, I always we have an affiliation here, and I'll say they'll actually ask me back on KFBK, my hometown, and I always take that opportunity, or even to jump on with KFI, WGN in Chicago. They'll take us. We'll jump on the phone and do a report from wherever we are, which goes back to my radio roots. So I think just getting your hands and your paws in every part of the media broadcast world you can is really important, because it all comes together, it all overlays, to bring you that tapestry of being who you are.
Yeah, and I think like to the point you just made, it's very relatable to many of our listeners because if you're someone who wants to build your personal brand, you want to be on as many platforms as
Yeah.
possible. And what I find fascinating about News Nation is that it's allowing so much of your talent to have many different their voices in different areas. I've
Mhm.
seen News Nation anchors on Substack. We have YouTube. And I think that that's a sign of the evolving media landscape, the recognition in the importance of building out a personal brand beyond just what you're showing on television, because they know that if someone falls in love and starts trusting you on one of these other platforms, they're ultimately potentially going to come to News Nation. So I think it's a very strong strategy. You mentioned YouTube. It is now the largest social platform in America.
Mhm.
And I think it was about 84% of Americans use YouTube. They are falling into the YouTube shorts, which then take them over to that long form video. Long form video on YouTube is the most streamed in households right now.
Yeah.
And so being there and having a presence there is so great. You have Crime Files. So why don't you tell us a bit about what you're doing with YouTube?
So I have a YouTube channel, Crime Files with Laura Ingle, recently rebranded. It used to be called the Ingle Edit, but now it's Crime Files, and you can see there, on my page. I've been working on rebranding and telling people what this is, going out and giving you behind the scenes content of the crime stories that I follow. And I have so much content. I have content. I mean, even going back to Scott Peterson and Michael Jackson, I have got boxes and boxes of videos and audio tapes that I want to post. And here's a platform that I can do that. And you're finding now, even with all the Netflix and the docuseries that we've been seeing about Scott Peterson and Michael Jackson, people want to know more about what those big trials were like. There have been, and especially with the Long Island serial killer, we're doing that as well. So anytime I'm at a courthouse, anytime I just went to CrimeCon. Uh, Anytime that I go out in the field, I always film myself. And talk about tips. That is my number one tip that I could say, because I left Fox and all of my content that I did on Fox News Channel went, I don't have access to that anymore. But I always film myself. I always have something that I'm recording so that I have it. I covered Lacey Peterson for 2 decades. So the Lacey Peterson case, I'm still covering it today with the appeals process that's going on with Scott Peterson. And I have my own footage. That's really important. Take your own pictures, take your own video within, the parameters of whatever your employer is. But that's a really important. Keep your notes. Somebody may call you a pack rat, and I've got boxes of my notepads that I have kept. Maybe someday I'll write a book. People encourage me to do so. I never have time to sit down and think about it, but that's the kind of stuff that I'm doing here on my channel. There, I went to the Hamptons Who Done It. This was a true crime festival in April that you see me there talking to an absolute superstar, Barbara Butcher. She has a show on Discovery. She's an absolute rock star. She's a death investigator, and she's at the top of her field. And so whenever I go somewhere, I'll grab people and I'll say, hey, like this one right here in the middle, you see me talking to Pat Ryder. That's the police chief of Nassau County. I was at a press conference, and my crew was busy. I brought my tripod and my iPhone and my mic pack. I set it up. It's just me and him and a tripod in the middle of a parking lot, and I interviewed him about some really important stories that are going on in Nassau County, and I put that up on my YouTube. So I've just been working through my content that I've had in the past, and then what I do with the events that I cover and the true crime cases that I think are really fascinating. So many cases that still need justice and answers and eyeballs and help from the media, or from the media and from the public, for people to have awareness of it.
And what I love about your direction is you are taking people behind the scenes. Again, the point that she's making is a tripod, a mic, her own cell phone. She's doing it. If she can do it, you guys can do it too. And you can go to her YouTube to get some inspiration or to just learn more about these cases.
Mhm.
But I think it's a really smart idea because as we all were covering stories for our employers, often I didn't take any pictures for myself. I didn't shoot content for myself. It was all for my anchor, for the brand, never really for me. And I feel like right now it's very smart to be building out your own personal a portfolio on
Mm.
YouTube, build your audience because as you mentioned, the media is constantly seeing layoffs. We're constantly seeing change. And as more and more consumers make new decisions about where they want to obtain their news, it's better to be present and to already be there than to essentially have to start from scratch. So I am totally inspired by what you're doing. I think it's wonderful. You have so much to share, guys. You got to check it out. I have this one episode where I do talk about Rotten Mango and what they do to produce their content, and a lot of that behind the scenes, that raw element it's what Laura's bringing to her. She's bringing in that behind the scenes knowledge that you really can't get unless you're with an expert, and that's what you are.
Well, and I thank you very much for that. And I do want to give a shout out. My husband, I've drawn my husband into this as well.
Yes.
And so my husband and I, for instance, we covered one of the victims in the Long Island serial killer case that has really not been covered as much. I really wanted to go to the scene, and because we live on Long Island, my husband Kenny, who works in production, he's an audio tech, and that's how we met on the Geraldo show, by the way.
Oh.
And so that's how we met. And so he has been helping me. So it's not always a tripod. He's been out
Mhm.
there helping me. We took a ferry to Fire Island and we filmed this location that I had never seen it before. I said, I don't know where this victim, Karen Vergado, exactly was found. We had a day off. He said, let's go do it. I know how to get there because he's from Long Island. I'm from California. And so we did it. We did it together, and we shot the whole thing. We put it together. We edited it together. And it takes a long time. It can be very time consuming. So on my mornings before I go to my job, on the evenings, on my days off, this is what we do. We go to courtrooms and crime scenes to bring people boots on the ground, behind the scenes reporting every chance we get, because I feel that there is that. I feel I want to know behind the scenes. I like to see
Mhm.
all that. And so that's what I try and do on my channel.
And did you guys hear she's doing it on her days off?
Yeah.
So again, the hustle, the commitment. And, so many people they think, "Oh, I just want to grow my YouTube. I'm just going to start showing up." No, there's a lot that goes into it. You need a game plan, a strategy, and you need to be committed. And sometimes that does mean you're showing up when you want to be off to follow that passion project or to
Right.
to live out that purpose.
Right.
So, how have you been enjoying balancing? How are you balancing it all?
You know, I could use some work in that world and on that part. I really could, because because I'm in the throes of the last inning of this story of the Long Island serial killer. I shouldn't even
Mm.
say that because we're going to go into overtime, extra innings. But we are near sentencing, and I've been spending a lot of time. Like I had the opportunity. I've been trying to get in touch. Well, not get in touch. I've been in touch with the Suffolk County District Attorney, Ray Tierney, and he has been the absolute hero of this case. He has put together a Gilgo Beach task force. He was the one that it really all came together under his watch. And it turned out that he could talk to me on my day off. And it turned out that he could talk to me on my day off and a day that my husband had a gig. He's an audio tech. He was hired and he was in the city, and I had to figure it out real fast how to get to the Suffolk County DA's office I didn't want to do a handheld or even a tripod because tyranny is so important. And I called every person that I could think of. And I ended up calling, I remembered that one of my neighbors had a son who was going to journalism school and may have graduated. So I made the phone call and I said, "Is there any chance that he's home?" And she said, "He is. I got to go wake him up." So I said, "Could you wake him up?" And I offered him a day rate and I said, "I need you to follow me out to Suffolk County." And that's what we did this week. So I
That's incredible.
it wasn't, how I had envisioned how it went down, but I got it done, with his help and my many thanks to him as well, and we did it, and then you've gotta put it together, and that's
Yeah.
another day off. So, there is a balance, and I've gotta learn how to, you know, walk away from it, but when you have something that's timely, you wanna get it out, and that's the part that, eventually one of these days I'll figure out how to get an editor involved. Kenny and I edit together, but we have jobs and we have a son and we have a dog and there's things that need to be taken care of. So there is a balance. I need to be a little bit better about that, but I'm working on it.
Yeah, and I think we all are. And many of us that are trying to build our own brands online know that it is a lot of work.
Mhm.
But I think what's inspiring is to hear your journey from unknown to known and what you did to really start to make a name for yourself. And even in your current role, your known News Nation, you're still working on becoming known, but in a different way,
Mhm.
becoming known on YouTube, potentially a book. There's always that room for growth, and that journey from unknown to known essentially doesn't end.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm looking forward to doing more on YouTube. I've got so much in the can, as we say, that I mean, if I could, I wish I had a month just to sit down and get through it all, but it'll get out there eventually. My husband always says, "Slow and steady wins the race." I've turned to you for advice. I've turned to my colleagues and my friends who are also in this space as well. And you really have to have a passion for it. So pick something that you want to do. Pick something that is important to you that you feel others will enjoy and get on board with and get on the train and go.
Laura, it has been wonderful to talk to you. Thank you so much for being here, telling us all about your journey and sharing your YouTube experience. Everyone that's listening, I hope you'll check out her YouTube channel.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you having me and I look forward to seeing you soon.
Thanks so much for watching this episode or listening to us on your podcast platform of choice. If this is resonating with you or you think it could resonate with a friend, share it. Send this to someone who would appreciate this podcast or getting to know Laura Ingle. I'll have links to everything she has going on in the description, so be sure to check that out. And if you have ideas for her crime channel, reach out. I can get you in touch. I can send your pitches her way. I have my email in this description too, just so you can get in touch. And now for another episode of Unknown to Known, or if you're on YouTube, stick around. Grab some Think Like a Producer episodes, binge them, get them in. Oh, or check out those technical tutorials. All right, I should go. All right, thanks again. Bye, guys.